The other day, I ran into somebody on YouTube who was positing that the story of Jesus could be a myth. He might have existed. There's just not enough, historic and archaeological evidence to prove that he existed. And thus, if you can't really even prove that he existed, do you have any right to really say you have to follow this man as the only way to God? Now, the whole Jesus myth theory, it's really popular in the pop atheist circles and the pop skeptic circles. It's not limited to atheists. I run into some pagans who hold it. I ran into a Jewish guy who held it. But this position will get you just laughed out of the room if you're in with a bunch of New Testament textual scholars or in a room with a bunch of Middle Eastern historians. It is just not a good scholarly position, and I'm going to go show you a few reasons why. Now, some people say, and you can't use, they'll say you can't use the Bible. You can't use the Bible as proof. Well, I'm not so much saying use the Bible as proof, but there are some things written in the Bible that if Jesus was a myth, why was it said this way? Why, like for example, first thing I'm gonna go to is Galatians chapter 1. Now, there's no two ways about this. This is an authentically Pauline epistle. Faithless scholars acknowledge that the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Galatians because he doesn't look particularly good in this, and a later writer would not, have Paul look like he's trying to make a bunch of people who are doubting his authority as an apostle believe that he's legit. They make him look like a titan, a hero, man laying down the law. That's not the way the Apostle Paul looks in the book of Galatians. He's actually trying to establish his credibility as an apostle. So Paul talks about his conversion to Christianity and what happened afterwards. In verse 19, it talks about he went to Jerusalem and stayed for 15 days and stayed with Peter. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. Now, that's a pretty just disinterested, casual mention of James, the Lord's brother. It would seem that it was, the way Paul says that, it was just common knowledge among everyone that Jesus existed and he had a brother named James. The guy I was talking to on YouTube about this, I said, what do you think the case is? That Paul, in attempting to get his credibility up with the Galatians, concocted a story that this mythical person had a brother who was a real person? And he just said, well, you can't use the Bible to authenticate the Bible. And I said, that's really not what I'm doing. I'm like, it's pretty absurd to say that Paul just drummed up this idea of James having a brother while writing to the Galatians. It's much easier to say, well, yeah, what's easier to believe? I think it's easier to believe that Jesus had a brother, and he was James, and Paul was just kind of mentioning him in passing. More than that, I really gotta say, okay, you can't use the Bible, you can't use the Gospels to prove that Jesus really was alive. You know whose picture I'm bringing up here? I have a little confession to make. Back in my day, I loved to listen to the Howard Stern show. And can I tell you something? Sorting through all the trash that's on it, getting beyond all that stuff, if he would be able to not punt to the trash radio, putting all that aside, the PG-rated stuff on that show, it was a funny show back in its day. It really was. And it was hilarious the way they would riff on each other on the show. And Howard had this producer, his name was Gary, and he acquired the nickname Baba Booey. And he would screw up, and they would just be all over him about it. And they, he was obviously a bright guy, but they basically came up with this almost caricature of who he was when he screwed up, that he was just a complete, nincompoop. And they did a voice for him that sounded nothing like him. And there was Gary Delabate, the actual producer, and then there was almost like his alter ego that they make him out to be, Baba Booey. Let me tell you something. If Jesus was a myth, Baba Booey wrote the Gospel of Mark. And I'm going to show you why. If Jesus was a myth, here's Baba Booey ginning up this whole story about the life of Jesus. And it comes time for him, he's saying to himself, well, now's the time that I think I should have Jesus speak a prophecy. What should I say, boff? Well, I'm going to have him talk about what might be happening before the fall of Jerusalem, or maybe even before the end of the world. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to make him look like a powerful prophet. I'm going to have him say, but about the day or the hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, nor the Father. That'll make him look like a great prophet. Yeah, boff, what do you think? He's going to say that he doesn't even know the day of his return. Do you think that sounds like a good idea, boff? I'm going to write it down. If somebody was ginning up an account, and just totally making up the Jesus story, why in the world would they have him? Why would they just say no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, not the angels in heaven? They could have just been silent about the fact that he said he didn't know. They included it. And look what he refers to himself as in this. The Son, but only the Father. That is pretty clear evidence that Jesus was a person, and he did believe himself to be the Son of God. If you're a Muslim, I know Muslims love using this verse against Christians to show that Jesus isn't God. Muslims, careful how you use that verse, because that pretty well destroys the theology of the Quran. So there's one, but let's continue through as Baba Booey writes the Gospel of Mark. Time to write the crucifixion narrative. And he's thinking to himself, well, it's about time to have Jesus die in this story that I'm writing. Now, I want to gain as many converts as I can. I want to make it look like he was strong in the face of death and didn't, accepted it willingly. I know what I'm going to make his last words. Around 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, I know! I'm going to make it look like he trusted, that he felt like he was abandoned by God at the end. Yeah, that'll gain even more converts. My God, why have you forsaken me? Again, if Jesus didn't exist, why in the world would they include this? This is a very controversial passage of Scripture that on its face looks like Jesus died feeling like he had been abandoned by God. No one in their right mind would make this up. And just one more example. The resurrection. And here's Baba Booey writing the resurrection account in Mark. Well, now it's time to give the story a happy ending, boff. And I think I know what I'm going to do. His tomb's going to be emptied out, and I'm going to have the most uncredible people discover the tomb. I'm going to have women who can't even testify in court discover it. Yeah, and instead of having Peter and John, no, that would make too good a story. I'm going to have women who no one would actually believe they discovered the tomb discover it instead. And so what do? They discover that they go to Jesus' tomb, and he has a bunch of hysterical women who run away from the tomb, in terror, discovering it. Again, you're making up this as a myth. Really, would you do this? I wouldn't. So basically, to close, if you're a skeptic and you say the burden of proof is on me, that I got to prove that Jesus really was a person, well, I got to say the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate to me that Baba Booey wrote the Gospel of Mark. because that's the only person who could have made something so ridiculously stupid if he was conjuring up a myth.